Somebody take my picture.
Sure send me a copy.
Hoes, bitches and hoes. Merry Christmas.
Yeah, sadly no Metal Gear Solid 2 review this year.
To admit my own faults here, there were a lot of issues that did end up getting in my way, such as life in general, or the Ratchet & Clank 2 review being longer than expected.
No, it was a dud.
And debating on whether or not I should take a look at the Twin Snakes, but I ultimately decided to take a third option.
The Ratchet & Clank 2 review is coming at the end of the year, followed by an update video before 2021 hits to outline failed promises, and exactly where I've been and what's up in terms of this channel going forward.
I mean, it wouldn't be the first time I wanted to start a marathon and the whole thing ended up blowing up in my face.
So in the effort to bring a little more positivity while I spend most of the video rambling over irrelevant gameplay footage, I figured I'd share with you 7 video games that left me pleasantly surprised. Games that I either had no idea what I was in for, or games that I thought were absolutely gonna fucking suck. But ended up leaving me with a positive experience and making me glad that I took the journey. So, starting with number 7. Movie to video game tie-ins aren't really a thing anymore, and for those of you who are old enough to remember them, their quality was very mixed. You'd get some absolute clunkers like many a game seen on a 16-bit console, but also some that showed a lot of potential hampered by either budget constraints or a very strict release deadline, sealed so Enter the Matrix and the Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith game. And then you get the likes of X-Men Origins Wolverine, a movie that, let's be honest, is better than most of the X-Men movie catalog, but at the same time is also, in stark contrast to the game, which, honest to god, is actually really fun. And above all else, the game's atmosphere is honest to god more chilling and far more immersive than the film it's based on. It's the one game which I feel captured Wolverine's essence more than most X-Men games, and to have Hugh Jackman reprise this role, I think just adds a lot to the charm of the game. I mean, if you want a game where all the elements are in their place, then X-Men Origins Wolverine is one I wholeheartedly recommend. In the early 2000s, if you had a PlayStation 2, there was no better game to have in your collection than Ratchet & Clank. It's got the guns, the sardonic wit, the vibrant personality, the era's signature 2000s edge intertwined with retro-futuristic sci-fi. What more could you need? But then, young Solidus Scully encountered what would soon be known as a rivalry between Ratchet & Clank with a little-known franchise called Jak and Daxter. And this was something that my young self found absolutely irritating. I just glanced at the cover of Jak and Daxter: The Precursor Legacy and thought it was just some pussy-ass elf fantasy shit for little kids who think that Spyro the Dragon is too edgy.
I was admittedly a very temperamental kid when it came to the media I liked.
Keep in mind, I was raised on a steady upbringing of nu metal with a Matrix-influenced love for sci-fi aesthetics, and that was generally the kind of thing that caught my eye more than stuff that was probably a bit more age-appropriate for me at that time. But for all my tentative snark, I was willing to try something new. I mean, if Jak and Daxter has the balls to compare itself to Ratchet & Clank with all its greatness, then surely this game's gotta be something pretty special. And fortunately for me, I ended up really liking the game. With the sole exception of the bullshit 100% ending, I still think Jak 1 is a pretty solid platformer, with its tone and world setting hitting all the right notes for me without being too childish and understanding the nuance that makes the game something that I think anyone could enjoy. And while not my favourite game in the Jak and Daxter series, I do still owe that game a huge thank you for being the game to teach me not to judge a book by its cover, and to never be afraid to give something a try in order to see its worth before judging it. I mean, hell, if it wasn't for this game, I don't think I'd be interested in half the franchises I'm interested in today. I mean, I have an entire review detailing my thoughts on the game, but even today I still think Jak 1 is worth playing, and it's probably in your best interest to pick up a digital copy while it's still on PSN. You know, back around 2012 when the Silent Hill series was pulling out all the stops before breathing its last, I can't say I was particularly impressed with Silent Hill Downpour. I mean, I didn't hate it by any means, in fact it was honest to God a step up from the likes of Homecoming, and at the time my negative opinion on Shattered Memories. However, Downpour wasn't really a game that, at least compared to the Team Silent entries, I thought was any good since it was part of the evil Tom Hewlett era. Or at least not a game that I'd ever consider playing again. And so, a few years down the line, after PT thoroughly bit the dust, I ended up replaying Silent Hill Downpour, and I ended up liking the game a whole lot more than I did before. It's important to note that this was when Scully Reviews was already in full swing at this point, so maybe my reviewer brain ended up taking over and analysing the parts of the game Downpour did well, but all the same, I ended up falling in love with Silent Hill Downpour in a way I never expected. Taking a closer look at the story, I felt invested in the character's struggles in a way that I never was before. During the gameplay, while not exactly pants-shittingly terrifying, the game did have its moments during the side quests, and speaking of which, what a great addition to the game the side quests were, that not only flesh out the townspeople, but also contained similar stories that I think could honest to God become Silent Hill games of their own. It was with this newfound experience that I ended up learning the valuable lesson not to hold everything up to this phantom standard I had in my head, but instead to just take a look at the game for what it does on its own merits. A personal philosophy that I still carry with me to this day for whatever piece of media that I take a look at. Except for Silent Hill Homecoming though, that game's still pretty bullshit. And speaking of games that took my breath away, we return to the Christmas spirit once more with Metal Gear!
Fa la 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 la. Fuck this shit.
I have to admit, when I first played the original Metal Gear, I really didn't think that much of it. Besides the glory that is Dirty Duck and a few interesting gameplay facets, the first Metal Gear game is very much a product of its time. So going into Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, I didn't really hold out much hope for it being anything special. At absolute best, a tacit simple story that told about the Zanzibar land incursion with Grey Fox and Big Boss fights.
Try saying that 3 times drunk.
And overall a game starring forgettable characters with nary an improvement made to its predecessor. But the moment I started playing great Cliff Burton's Ghost, not only did my opinion change swiftly for the better, but the game as a whole just blew me away. Every issue that I had with the previous game was fixed, and the improvements Metal Gear 2 made all around this time, even going forward, were innovations that I feel really defined the series. In fact, it's a crying shame that Metal Gear Solid ended up stealing most of the credit for what this game did, and honest to goodness, I'd argue that Metal Gear 2 does everything so much better than that game ever could. Especially in terms of story, because for as much as I rag on Hideo Kojima, this is a prime example of Kojima at his absolute best. A compelling plot, twists that keep you guessing, a well fleshed out world contextualized by the suffering of the children in Zanzibar land, and what you could see throughout the game. And what surprised me most was being legitimately invested in the characters. Everyone from Solid Snake to Grey Fox, Big Boss, Dr. Madnar, I think all of them had their greatest moments from this one game in the series alone. Gustavo especially, since this is one of the few times that I was legitimately shocked with the jaw to the floor to see a character death. Someone who I just assumed would suffer the same fate as Jennifer or Holly White, where they go on to live into obscurity in later games never being brought up again, suddenly dying in Solid Snake's arms. It caught me so off guard, but even in spite of that, the game kept me hooked until the very end, and just continued to send me down the rabbit hole of intrigue and dark secrets. And all of this was from an 8-bit game. If ever I underestimated an era of gaming for what it could produce, it would be this one. I know copies of it might be scarce, but if you happen to live nearby a store that still sells PS3 games and you see a copy of the MGS HD collection, then I highly recommend picking it up and playing this via Snake Eater. Trust me, it is well worth your time.
Oh no! Not Cock of Duty! That franchise sucks!
Is exactly what my younger self was thinking at that point.
Back around the time when Call of Duty Black Ops was a new game, I, like most of the internet, didn't really think highly of the Call of Duty franchise, for all the reasons that you've probably heard before. Generic kill the terrorist plotting and repetitive shooting mechanics, and of course all the grey-brown environments with no style or substance. I was hanging around with a lot of platformer fanatics at the time, and while I was definitely a fan of FPS games like Doom, Halo, and Resistance Fall of Man, Call of Duty was one where I didn't really want to play it by metrics of what was the common consensus at the time. But one fateful birthday in 2011, I got it as a present from my cousin, and not one to pass up the opportunity to try something new, I gave it a shot and and from moment one to the end of the game, I found a newfound respect for Call of Duty. I said it in the review and I'll say it again, but I was fully invested in the gameplay, the weapon variety, the way the gun's handled and the various makes and models, the set pieces like riding a motorcycle to escape from a POW camp, and the conspiracy psychological thriller plot elements as Alex Mason's sanity goes through the ringer, and everything completely dispelling the myth about the Call of Duty games about them just being generic war FPS games that only really caught on due to current affairs going on during the 2000s. I got a lot of joy playing through the multiplayer of the game for the fast-paced hectic fun that comes with each of the maps provided, and the zombies mode will forever be my favourite for its arcade spectacle, and the amount of hidden secrets like the media fragments that play hidden songs, or the Dead Ops arcade that transforms a gameplay style completely on its head by turning it into an arcade shooter. Like, if you have any interest in the Cold War era history at all with a fictitious twist, I'd easily recommend Call of Duty Black Ops in a heartbeat, even if it is in contention with World at War for being my favourite in the series. It was difficult trying to narrow down which Devil May Cry game I wanted to put on this list. I was considering on putting the reboot here, but for as much as the hardcore fanbase would make you believe, there are in fact a lot of people who do genuinely love the game as an alternate take on the DMC mythos. Another part of me also considered putting Devil May Cry 4 in this spot since after being severely disappointed with the previous entry, the fact that DMC 4 not only revitalized my love for the franchise but improved upon all my complaints in Devil May Cry 3 was definitely a prospect that made it a good candidate. But I think there's no other game in the series that left me with such a pause for thought than Devil May Cry 2. Bear in mind here that as far as the classic games were concerned, I started with Devil May Cry 1 and played my way through Devil May Cry 2, with those two games ostensibly building up what I like to see in the series for the longest time. And seeing the overwhelmingly negative reception for Devil May Cry 2 from fans and critics telling me how it's worse than you think, I couldn't help but sit there thinking,
Really?
don't get it twisted, I completely understand the game's flaws, especially to the showboating, look at me and my hardcore gamer skills that give me big dick energy crowd who mastered the game's style system in later games and equate extreme difficulty with an orgasm of ecstasy. But as someone who's mainly just there to experience what the game has to offer in all its aspects without feeling the need to impress an imaginary piece of software, I couldn't help but disregard those opinions when playing through Devil May Cry 2. There are definitely critiques to be made, quite a lot of them as a matter of fact, and in no way am I trying to sell this game as being an underrated gem lost to time, but at the same time, from an objective standpoint, an absolute worst, you could say that Devil May Cry 2 is mediocre. A major reason being the game's development cycle, but even in that case, people hold this game in the same breath one might mention games like Superman 64 or the perennial punching bag Sonic 06 in terms of reputation. And I can't say that Devil May Cry 2 ever reached those levels for me. I can never say I had any glitches during my time playing the game, and neither was there anything in this game that I felt ruined the series. I think a lot of this is worth going into for a video on its own, but as far as my experiences with Devil May Cry 2 go, I actually really enjoyed it. There's something very alluring about the game's atmosphere, the visual design, the soundtrack, and the way the levels slowly descend into the underworld where you take on Argosax the Chaos and its infernal machinations. There's a lot about the game that just appeals to me. And while not my favorite incarnation of Mr. Dante Sparta Esquire, this game does have the best Dante one-liner of all time.
I was going to be the king of this world!
King? Yeah. Here's your crown.
Would I ever recommend the game? Probably not, but it is included in the DMC HD collection if you're at all curious. Let me tell you a story. Around 2009, I got into a phase where my video game taste shifted towards the older generations of consoles, particularly that of the genre of platformers, horror games, and others that took my fancy. I tried out a lot of franchises from the likes of Banjo-Kazooie, Super Mario 64, a ton of classic and X-series Mega Man games,
And I never really got into any of them.
and it wasn't for lack of trying or that any of the games were bad necessarily. I mean, I could see the appeal and why people enjoyed them, but they just didn't click with me in the way that I think they should have, or at least not to the level that they did with others. I could see what people loved and what made the games gel with them, and you know, I could understand that and I could respect it. But back then, if there was ever a franchise that I could never understand why people liked, it would be Sonic the Hedgehog. Back around that time, I honest to goodness had no idea why anyone would want to invest in a series that I, like many, thought was past its prime, too convoluted for its own good, had too many unnecessary characters, and were just overall bad games with a deluded fanbase of 30-something man-children still clutching at Mega Drive cartridges, or emo teenagers who had an unhealthy obsession with Shadow the Hedgehog. During this period, after hearing about the disaster that was Sonic 06, Sonic Unleashed, and stuff about knights, genies, and hoverboards, along with the popular opinions going around at the time, I just assumed that the series was irredeemably bad, and because nobody ever said anything to the contrary, I just took that opinion on Sonic as truth. Putting aside my childhood memories of playing Sonic Heroes and Shadow the Hedgehog as a kid, I did try in vain to extend an olive branch to the series and at least try out some of the games. I played the classics via the Ultimate Mega Drive collection, and aside from Sonic and Knuckles, I can't say I really looked too favourably on classic Sonic since it left me feeling a profound meh. I mean, they were fine games, they were okay, but nothing to really keep my attention. And yet I still kept on hearing people whine about why they liked characters like Shadow when back then I just thought he was an emo fuckhead who'd like to swear and shoot guns. I continue to sit there and wonder why people even like this franchise to begin with, and even with games like Sonic Colors, even how brief my gameplay experience of the game actually was, it was still at the level of nothing special.
It wasn't until a wave of nostalgia hit me and I mustered up the wanting desire to rewatch Sonic X.
It started off as an ironic mentality of, wow, Sonic sure does suck, but that slowly developed into a mindset of, hey, this show isn't actually that bad, which left me a little bit more open to the blue blur, even if slightly.
But compounding all of this would be my fascination with the Sega Dreamcast.
Unlike the Xbox, GameCube, or PlayStation 2, in 2009, the Dreamcast for me was this mysterious treasure trove of lost video games that I never saw anybody I knew play. And with the titles I heard about in the system like Skies of Arcadia, Shenmue, and Resident Evil Code Veronica, I needed to pick up this console and discover the mysteries that lay within. And it was then that I remembered a little something about Sonic X. The anime had a Sonic Adventure adaptation, and one that was based on the 1998 Dreamcast game, with the game being a launch title for the system, so I figured it'd be apropos to christen my Dreamcast playing experience. After getting a taste of Shenmue, I decided to try Sonic Adventure to discover that the game aged like a bottle of stale piss, the animations were clunky and stilted, and that the game as a whole could charitably be considered a product of its time. And I loved every minute of it.
You gotta understand that at the time, I had never played anything like that before. The graphics, the music, the adrenaline pumping action, it all provided a video game experience that I've never had before or since.
At long last, everything clicked into place, and it was the definitive moment where I could say, I understand why people love Sonic the Hedgehog. The game delivers what it sets out to do, provide you with an adventure spanning across the millennia, showing sides of the characters never before seen with cinematic cutscenes and voice acting. Unique gameplay for each character, living breathing hub worlds from Station Square to the Mystic Ruins to the Egg Carrier, music that defined the signature multi-genre diversity that the series is beloved for. All wrapped together with a story that treats each character with respect and develops its mythos in a way that no previous game ever could. And after this game, I wanted to know more, to play as many games as I could, become acquainted with the characters and mythology, to absorb as much as I could about the series. The only other franchise that ever got me invested to this level was Silent Hill. And at this time, both franchises stood on equal footing for me as the series I cherish most. And over the course of time, the misconceptions that clouded my judgment about the Sonic series melted away, and I ended up seeing the franchise with fresher eyes and a more optimistic perspective about the series as a whole. Or to put it another way, without Sonic Adventure, not only would I probably not be here today, but I probably wouldn't have been invested in the series and been a fan for as long as I have. So, while I can understand people's apprehension to try a game that's very steeped in late 90s archaic game mechanics, if you're predisposed to enjoy games of that ilk, then I think Sonic Adventure will pack one hell of a punch and give you more than you could have ever dreamed of.
And on that note, I'm Solid Scully, keep it new metal, have a very Merry Christmas to all, and well, I hope you dudes and dudettes stay safe this Christmas. Catch you later for the Ratchet & Clank 2 review, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
I was going to be the king of this world!
King? Yeah. Here's your
Dad!
By the way, I don't really have any sort of, like, post-credit stinger or anything, but I figured I might as well mention this here. Like, I did a complete take of this, you know, the whole commentary aspect of the reviews were recorded via microphone, and you wanna know what the funniest fucking thing was? I recorded this whole fucking thing with my mic muted. I literally wanted to bite my fucking fingers off.